We need to bet on uranium. You mentioned earlier that interest in nuclear energy in Kazakhstan has come and gone over the years. What kept you going through that lull? When I mentioned that to people, they don't believe that Kazakhstan was ahead of the curve. I had concerns when this issue was brought up for a referendum. So do renewables really compete with nuclear energy? Honestly, renewables are quite expensive. What about the financial model? Do you already have that mapped out? We're saying, if you're bringing the tech, bring the money too. When will construction of the nuclear power plant finally begin? Well, people often tell us to speed things up, but you know, sometimes it's actually better not to rush and do things right. Timur Zhantikin is the CEO of Kazakhstan Nuclear Power Plants LLP and a nuclear physicist, not just by education, but by passion. He began his career at the Institute of Nuclear Physics under the Academy of Sciences of Kazakhstan. Years later, under his leadership, the country began laying the groundwork for its first nuclear power plant, well before the idea ever went to a referendum. Timur Miftachovich, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. First off, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on some recent news. On March 18th, the President signed a decree to establish a new agency dedicated to nuclear energy in Kazakhstan. Given your lifelong dedication to this field, how do you view this step? What do you think it signals for the future? First, we had the referendum, where people clearly supported moving forward with nuclear energy, and not long after that, the idea of creating a broader nuclear cluster was announced. The truth is, Kazakhstan already has a lot going on in this area. We're developing a wide range of nuclear technologies. Just look at nuclear medicine, for example. The Institute of Nuclear Physics produces a lot of valuable products for different industries, including isotopes that are even exported abroad. And then there's the National Nuclear Center. They're not only involved in the work related to the old testing grounds, but also carry out nuclear safety projects for other countries and companies around the world.
Других компаний, других стран в области обеспечения безопасности атомной энергетики. То есть
So would it be fair to say that this move signals a new phase, or perhaps confirmation that Kazakhstan is approaching nuclear energy with renewed momentum? Yes, absolutely. Again, this ties back to the referendum. It was held to gauge public sentiment, to see how people feel about the industry. And the positive results showed that, yes, society is open to it. Now we're starting to see that support is turning into real, practical action. So the industry has grown to the point where it really needs its own dedicated agency to coordinate all of its different parts. That's right. I see this agency as more of a transitional body. It's a way to consolidate efforts and move full steam ahead with development. Once the momentum builds and the system is fully up and running, responsibilities can be shifted over to the appropriate state institutions, like the government ministries. In that case, let's dive into the bigger picture. Can you walk us through what Kazakhstan's nuclear energy sector looks like today and where you see it heading in the future? Of course, let's get into it.
Timur
Miftachovich, let's start with the company you currently head. It was founded back in 2014 as part of an early roadmap for building a nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan. But to the general public, it feels like nuclear energy only recently entered the spotlight. So what has the company actually been doing all these years? I came on board in 2018. By then, the company had already been brought under the umbrella of Kazakh. It became part of their structure in 2016. So my work in this field really began within Kazakh. From what I've gathered, there wasn't much going on with the company prior to that. It had been established, yes, but then interest in nuclear energy in Kazakhstan seemed to fade for a while. Then in 2018, things started moving again. My team and I got to work on a feasibility study for what would be the country's first nuclear power plant, basically laying the groundwork before any actual project planning could begin. The National Nuclear Center did a lot of heavy lifting on this. They looked into two possible locations, one in the east, near the town of Kurchatov, and another in Balkhash. These two areas were highlighted in a directive from the Prime Minister as potential sites. By the end of the year, the studies were finished and both locations were found to be suitable. We based our assessments on Kazakhstan's national regulations and also incorporated guidelines from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. We presented everything to the government, got their approval, and were then asked to arrange for an independent evaluation. That's where our Japanese partners came in, a consortium made up of the Japan Atomic Power Company and Marubeni Utility Services. They reviewed our approach, the findings, our conclusions, and in the end, they validated our results. And just to clarify, what period are we talking about here? That was all in 2018 and 2019. I see, but in 2021, the president addressed the idea of building a nuclear power plant publicly. What happened in the time between? Well, after 2019, momentum slowed again. You could say the government's interest in nuclear energy faded a bit. But we didn't want to just sit and wait. Since we had already started the process, we decided to conduct what we called marketing procedures. We reached out to the world's leading nuclear companies, requesting technical and commercial proposals. Our goal was to get a sense of the technologies available and the associated costs. We received responses from almost everyone except Westinghouse in the US, and we used those to make an initial assessment of which technologies might be suitable for Kazakhstan. We evaluated 13 different projects. Then, together with the Ministry of Energy, we developed a set of criteria and narrowed it down to 4 shortlisted options, projects we considered the best fit for our company. And I assume those are the vendors currently being discussed. Exactly. We updated everything again in 2022. You mentioned earlier that interest in nuclear energy in Kazakhstan has come and gone over the years. One of those dips happened while you were already heading the company. What kept you going through that lull? What made you believe that the work you were doing, the marketing studies, the feasibility reports, would actually lead somewhere? Or were you working with the mindset that it might never see the light of day? No, we never looked at it as something that would just sit on a shelf. If you think back to the 1990s, there was actually an earlier project that made it all the way to a government decision. Even back then, we were talking about need to diversify Kazakhstan's energy production. Most of it still revolves around coal. And well, as the saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So with uranium reserves like ours, and by the way, uranium is our main energy source, making up to 46% of our energy, last year, uranium exports accounted for 74% of our total exports. If we convert it into equivalent fuel, oil by comparison was 22%, coal even less, and so on. So it's pretty clear that we need to bet on uranium, and if we're looking to diversify our energy sector, uranium is the obvious choice. Of course. And it's not just about making uranium. We've led the world in that for years, but now we're building out the rest of the nuclear fuel cycle. Just a few years ago, we started exporting our own fuel assemblies. The ones produced in the east, right? Exactly, in Öskümen. So we now have our own fuel production, the technology behind it. And institutions like our National Nuclear Center are doing world-class research, especially in nuclear safety. They've been working with international partners to assess safety across different reactor types and fuel variants. They even conduct advanced simulations to study how reactor components behave in severe accident scenarios. That's extremely specialized work. Only a handful of centers reactors around the world can handle it. So we have both a solid technological and scientific base. And then there's our people. Right now, over 1,400 Kazakh specialists are working on the Akkuyu project in Turkey. We also have factories producing parts like pumps for that same project. So, in essence, we already have many elements of a nuclear sector in place. And would we be able to bring those people back? Yes, absolutely. Let's say the project in the Almaty region gets the green light. Could they be part of that? Absolutely. These are our people. I'm really curious about where things stand right now with the nuclear power plant project. We know the location's been chosen and there are 4 vendors in the running. There's also talk of forming a consortium, though that still feels more like media buzz than anything official. So tell me, what's actually happening behind the scenes at the moment? From our side, we're currently preparing to carry out engineering surveys at 3 potential sites. That's part of the legal process. Once the government selects the general area, which they did at the end of last year, we're required to examine 3 possible locations within that zone. These studies cover a whole range of factors: geology, geophysics, water supply, and more. It's a pretty comprehensive checklist. Once we've gathered all that data, we'll choose the best site and hand it over to the vendor, who will then conduct more detailed research based on the specific design of the station. I see, but when the area was approved, weren't those 3 sites already selected? No. So why 3 now, and then just 1 gets picked? It's required by the regulations. What about the financial model? Do you already have that mapped out? Not yet. Naturally, financing is one of the key issues we bring up when speaking with these companies. To be honest, we've seen far too many projects grind to a halt or get scrapped entirely because of poor financial planning. And that's not just in nuclear energy. Any large-scale project that requires serious investment needs a well-thought-out financial strategy from the start. So of course we're asking these questions: who's paying and how? And who exactly are you asking? The vendors, the 4 companies proposing their technology. We're saying, if you're bringing the tech, bring the money too. And when it comes to choosing between those 2 vendors, how is that decision going to be made, in your view? In 2022, we updated the feasibility study data for all 4 projects and carried out a preliminary analysis. We also refined the evaluation criteria with support from a French engineering firm that has extensive experience in nuclear projects. They use a tried and tested system that's been applied across numerous nuclear initiatives. Based on this, we ranked the projects purely on technical and economic grounds, which is what we reported on. But of course, as you can imagine, political factors also come into play. Ultimately, the final decision lies with the government. When will construction of the nuclear power plant finally begin? So, what's the next step? Well, we've still got 3 potential sites to evaluate, and that process is going to take about a year. By next year, we should have completed that and picked the final location for the plant. At that point, we'll bring in the vendor, who will already have been selected by then, along with a specific plant design tailored to that site. The vendor will then carry out additional assessments to make sure the site is fully suitable. If everything looks good, we'll move on to the paperwork. That means preparing an environmental impact report and a preliminary safety assessment, both based on the actual design we'll be building. So we're talking another year at least. Yes, about a year. So actual construction won't start for another 2 years. That's about right. And once construction begins, how long will it take? Typically around 5 years from the first concrete pour. Some projects move a bit faster, others a little slower. It really depends on the design and circumstances, but 5 years is a good ballpark. So let's say the timeline of about 7 years is something we're working with. Is that realistic? Are we prepared to wait that long, or is there a way to speed things up a bit? Well, people often tell us to speed things up, But you know, sometimes it's actually better not to rush and do things right. First, we have the state's expert review. That means a thorough check of all the project documentation. After that, we need to get approval from the government to go ahead with the construction. If the government gives us the green light, we can move on to the detailed design and budget, and then construction can finally begin. Now, I know 7 years might sound like a long time, but you have to think about the big picture. We're building something that's going to last for 100 years. It's a project for the next century.
Вы сказали о том, что все-таки интерес...
You mentioned earlier that interest in nuclear energy tends to rise and fall. Why do you think that happens? Why isn't there a more consistent push to develop this sector?
Идем поступательно и не развиваем эту отрасль. А почему это происходит волнообразно?
У меня такое тоже сложилось мнение, что в принципе это зависит от того, насколько
I think it really depends on how urgent the energy situation is at the time.
уперлись вот в то, что
Right now we're facing problems with coal, so nuclear energy is back on the table.
затравка есть, основа есть для
And since we already have the foundation for it, it makes sense to move forward.
А до этого
But back in the 90s, things were different. Coal plants were still running smoothly, and there was plenty of power.
надежно работали угольные станции.
No one was really thinking about diversifying our energy sources.
Никто тогда не воспринимал
It just felt like something we didn't need to worry about.
энергии. То есть это настолько далеко было.
А вот интересно, вот
So did the shortage of electricity from coal plants catch us by surprise? Or was it something we saw coming?
возник раньше, чем мы предполагали.
It was definitely something we saw coming. Back in 2018, alongside the studies on the suitability of nuclear sites, we also commissioned a comprehensive energy system modeling project for Kazakhstan.
По моделированию
We needed to figure out where a nuclear plant would make the most sense, when it would be needed, and how much power it would need to generate.
раз из этой модели
And the model showed us that by 2030, the South would be facing a power deficit of up to 2.7 gigawatts.
Отсюда мы сделали.
That's when we decided to move forward with building 2 nuclear reactors there. So you were already aware of this potential shortage back in the 2020s? Absolutely. By 2018 it was clear. The models showed there was no avoiding it. The deficit was coming.
Люди сказали о том, что да, они согласны с тем, что станция должна быть на территории.
After the referendum, when people voted in favor of having a nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan, did that change anything for your company?
Работа
I'm talking about the morale of your team and even your own personal outlook.
в моральном духе ваших сотрудников.
I wouldn't say it drastically boosted morale, but we were definitely waiting for the outcome.
Не изменился, но просто
To be honest, by the time the referendum was announced, we were already deep into the project. We'd been moving ahead, but then we had to put the brakes on for a while. We were ready to start with the engineering surveys and site preparations. But with the referendum still hanging over us and no clear outcome, we had to hold off. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. At best, I thought we'd get just over 50%.
в лучшем случае будет там чуть.
By the way, I wanted to ask you, since you were so actively involved in promoting nuclear energy in Kazakhstan, did you expect the response to be so overwhelmingly positive?
АЭС в Казахстане. Вот вы рассчитывали на то, что результат будет исключительно положительный?
Well, based on the discussions we had, I could tell that safety concerns were at the forefront for many people. Everyone was asking, what if something goes wrong? What if it blows up? What if it affects the southern regions? Then, when we mentioned Balkhash as a potential site, people started worrying about the water. Are you going to drain Balkhash? We already have such a shortage of water. Why put a nuclear plant there? All of these concerns, of course, were addressed. For example, the 2-reactor plant we're considering would only use about 0.3% of Balkhash's evaporation.
Испарение
Да,
Балхаша.
вы...
Yes, I remember you mentioning that, and it really sticks in my mind. Exactly. So the plant wouldn't significantly impact the water balance. And then, of course, there's the issue of safety. We made sure to select the right projects. These are third-generation reactors. They're not like the ones from Fukushima or Chernobyl. These are next-gen reactors with enhanced safety features, and they're already in operation. What about the people who are still opposed to it?
Разные люди. То есть есть, которые
Well, there are all kinds of people. Some of the concerns are understandable, especially from those who aren't familiar with nuclear energy. So it's natural for them to be worried. The technology is unfamiliar to them. Although interestingly, Kazakhstan has had it before. It's just that not many people seem to know that.
Вы имеете в виду Запад?
Are you talking about the western part of the country? Yes, exactly. The BN-350 reactor was the world's first industrial fast neutron reactor. When I mention that to people, they don't believe that Kazakhstan was ahead of the curve. And the same goes for our nuclear fuel cycle. People often think that all we do is mine uranium, but there's been a lot of technological progress here. And this is one reason I had concerns when this issue was brought up for a referendum. You can't put highly specialized questions like this to a public vote. For example, imagine if we put something like laparoscopic surgery to a referendum. The results would be unpredictable. Even medical professionals were initially against it. They'd say, how can you operate without actually seeing what you're doing? When you make a traditional incision, everything's laid out in front of you. But with laparoscopy, they're just poking a few holes and doing everything inside. So you think that the nuclear power plant issue is just as specialized as something like surgery? Absolutely. Every technology has its own intricacies, and there are experts for every field. It's like when you go to a doctor, you either trust them or you don't. And about the referendum results, you said they were unexpectedly positive, in a good way. Yes, they were a pleasant surprise, and that they were even better than I expected. When we started our marketing research back in 2018, the main goal was to address the energy shortage in southern Kazakhstan. But for me, nuclear energy isn't just about filling a gap, it's also about reducing carbon emissions. And as you know, climate issues are becoming more urgent every day. Everyone wants energy that doesn't contribute to global warming. Nuclear energy is exactly the type of solution we need to meet that demand. What do you think about renewable energy sources? They've become quite the trend lately, and they're supposedly carbon-free, right? Yes, when people talk about carbon-free energy, they usually think of renewables. But there are specific niches for each kind of energy. Honestly, I don't quite understand why people from the renewable sector seem to have issues with nuclear. We're working in completely different areas. Nuclear energy is mainly used for baseload generation, though there are some flexible plans. For example, France does it well, and so does Germany. When they had nuclear plants, they ran them flexibly. It's what you call dispatchable energy, unlike renewables. You can't just build a factory and expect renewables to provide consistent output. But there are certain niches. Now there is also talk about hydrogen, about pumping hydrogen for energy. But you can't build an entire country's industrial base on renewables alone. So do renewables really compete with nuclear energy? For some reason, nuclear is always the villain in their eyes. Is there really an opposition? Yes, there's opposition from that side. I'm always saying we don't need to be pitting these technologies against each other. They can actually complement each other. There's definitely space for renewables, but let's not forget that honestly, renewables are quite expensive. Is it comparable to the cost of building a nuclear plant? It's actually much more expensive than nuclear. I'd like to talk about the workforce in the industry. You mentioned that there are over 1,000 people working on Akkuyu, so it seems like the industry has the manpower it needs. But what about young specialists? We're planning for 7 years, but the station will be running much longer and will need ongoing maintenance. The president mentioned plans for 2 more stations, so we can see that nuclear energy is growing in the country. But is the workforce keeping pace with that growth? After all, it seems like these jobs require highly skilled professionals, likely with specialized higher education. Absolutely, they need higher education and specialized training too. Let me explain. First off, we have 3 research reactors, and we're training specialists for them right here in Kazakhstan.
Для этих реакторов кадры.
There are several universities involved, but the key one is KazNU, the National University in Almaty.
Казгу, ну сейчас,
They've been training specialists for about 60 years now.
которые уже, ну, я думаю, лет 60.
Is that a popular field of study? Are young people eager to pursue it?
Туда.
Ну, в последнее время
Honestly, there's been a decline in interest for technical specialties in recent years, and there are many reasons for that.
низкий уровень зарплаты.
For one, salaries are low. When we talk about the energy sector, not just nuclear, but energy in general, people don't make a lot of money.
Конечно, для
Of course, for the growth of nuclear energy, these issues will need to be addressed.
Может,
What do you think could motivate young people to choose careers in nuclear energy?
ядерщиками как-то.
Nuclear energy in the broad sense?
Скорее всего.
Well, more likely energy specialists.
если атомная энергетика,
For nuclear energy specifically, right now I don't think there's any big incentive. It's more driven by enthusiasm. But since the direction's been set, there will definitely be work done on training specialists.
некомпетенция.
That's outside our company's responsibilities, but we always raise this issue.
Что ребята в первую
The priority isn't just teaching, but making sure people are provided with jobs.
очередь обеспечить нормальную работу.
I know a lot of young people who've graduated in fields related to nuclear energy, but are now working in completely different sectors.
Которые подходят для атомной энергетики, но они
Why didn't you leave?
совершенно в других сферах.
А почему вы не оставили?
I guess I just got into it. You really seem passionate about the nuclear industry in Kazakhstan, about seeing it develop. Right now, we're talking about 7 to 8% energy coming from one station at the start. What would your ideal scenario look like?
На самом деле, надо
Well, honestly, we need to look at the overall development of the energy sector. I talk to people from other industries and they ask how many nuclear plants we need. I tell them that it's not about how many nuclear plants we want, it's about how we see the future of Kazakhstan's energy. What resources are we relying on? We have a lot of coal. I don't think we're ready to just abandon coal and switch entirely to nuclear. We have uranium, we have coal, those are our key resources. And there are new coal technologies emerging as well. So we're definitely not going to give up coal in the next 50 to 60 years.
50 лет не откажем.
But we do need to diversify how we produce electricity.
Вот это производство.
Ideally, nuclear could make up 50 to 60% of our energy mix, and that would work just fine.
Нормально.